So, yeah, Tino mentioned some aspects that I would like to pick on. I mean, this whole project here is very much about experimenting with the format of the exhibition. Out of a discourse on what actually the core or the DNA of the exhibition ritual, as we call it, is, what its social function is, both in history and in present time, and in which direction this may or should develop in the 21st century. So one core feature that I would like to focus on here right now this morning of this DNA is something that Tino also mentioned already, the liberal structure of the exhibition ritual, because that's something quite specific and unique to exhibitions. Think of, what would you think is the difference between going to a church mass or to a theater play or to an exhibition? In the church mass, it's one person, the priest, speaking to many. Yeah? In the theater, the setting is somehow kept. It's one that speaks to the many, except that it's not the priest, but an actor or a group of actors. But the setting of this one communicating to the many is the same. Whereas in the exhibition, this is categorically different. We have many speaking to many, yeah? Visitors to visitors, mediated and transmitted by artworks, material objects. So that's a categorically new and modern in the sense of more liberalized and more flexibilized structure. And in terms of cultural history, that is in fact a big achievement, because it allows a larger amount of people, a mass society, to participate in a more open and flexibilized way. Today, museums and exhibitions are open to, like this one here, to thousands of people a day, or even 10,000 people of a day, and still, so to a mass of people that nevertheless is not addressed as a mass, but can walk around freely, individualized, flexibilized. And this is very much what Western modern democracies were about, a democratization, but the accessibility to a mass of people, but nevertheless a focus on the individual. So all this is inscribed in exhibitions, and that's actually why we're interested in this ritual, because it mirrors to such an extent basic features of the society it takes place in. So what I would like to do here now. Oh, and by the way, I mean, this is of course something that is very much radicalized in the Fun Palace. Cedric Price had the idea that the Fun Palace could be open to 10,000s of people, but without even a fixed program. So it's extremely liberal. The people should basically be able to decide for themselves what could take place here. So both the idea of an accessibility and the idea of this liberal, flexibilized structure is very much radicalized in the Fun Palace. So what I'm doing here now in the next 7-8 minutes or so is to, on the one hand, going back into the history, to one sort of transitional moment, which I personally find particularly interesting, before I then will speak about what in a way is the problematic aspect of this liberal structure today, and why are we even concerned with trying to reshape or refigure it, find different modes of addressal, as Tino said earlier. So maybe we can have this one image that I, well, you can't see much, but I chose this one, first of all, as an homage to Hans-Ulrich Obrist, because I know you like Athanasius Kircher, who was a genius from the 17th century, a big personality, probably one of the biggest personalities of the 17th century, purportedly the last man who knew everything. A German Jesuit scholar, a polymath, an expert on Asia, on Egypt, a barometer of virtually every intellectual transformation that took place at his time. He translated, he invented, he experimented, he, for instance, produced a diagram to prove that the Tower of Babel could not reach the moon, and he descended into the craters of the Vesuve to better understand the volcanic activity, and he collected. Kircher had a museum. So he had a collection, a museum in the Roman college, this Jesuit college in Rome in the 17th century, with a typical Baroque Wunderkammer, curiosity cabinet with skeletons and paintings and sculptures and medical instruments and so on. Most of all, Kircher was obsessed with communication. He was collecting ancient scripts, modern scripts, communicational devices. He even invented a machine with which one could produce words in different languages by moving letters. But his museum was not only a collection of communicational devices, it was also a communicational enterprise in itself, which one could actually not see here. But on the right we see there is Kircher, and he's receiving a letter. So it was, humanist culture was very much about exchanging letters that would grant you access to one place, and then you get another recommendation letter to access another place, and so on. So museums in the 17th century became more and more social places. The early museums were spaces of contemplation, spaces of inner recess, spaces bereft of sociability, studiolos. While in the 17th century, they became more and more open, social places with an audience, visitors became more heterogeneous. People reacted to this differently. Contemporaries of Kircher, such as the English philosopher Robert Boyle, developed elaborate ceremonies to keep people out of his laboratory. Kircher did the opposite. He invented, and that's what interests me most, he invented a technology to bring them in, which was a speaking tube, of 8 meters length that he had installed in his museum to connect his private quarters to his museum. And through this speaking tube, the guard, the custodian, could communicate with Kircher and announce visitors. But presumably, as Kircher put it, in the remote access of my bedroom. But presumably, the speaking tube also worked the other way around, so that visitors might occasionally hear the disembodied voice of Kircher appear from nowhere in the museum, like the Wizard of Oz. So the speaking tube is interesting because in a certain way it functions as a last attempt to hold on to this modality of the one that speaks to the many. People walk through a museum and all of a sudden there's the ghost, the one person that speaks to them, that addresses them. But also there's a modern aspect to it in the sense that it allows civil society to constantly intrude into Kircher's life, which tells us something about an emerging public sphere that comes into being. A rising modern society needed an increasing number of people to participate, to involve them into processes that constitute this society, not just as buyers and consumers, but also as a public that discusses and exchanges and debates. Therefore, this liberalization of the museum was a politically, not just culturally, but also politically, a very important aspect. So in a way, one could say the speaking tube constitutes a kind of hybrid between Kircher being the host, that's the old modality of the appointment. He's the host of a private place and people come as his guests. And on the other hand, him being, and that's the modern format, him being the representative of a becoming public institution, a museum, where people are not hosts anymore, they walk around and they're free in their own terms. So I wanted to share this with you because you can see that this shift from this old modality on which basically in all cultures, all cultural formats were based upon, the modality of the appointment where the one speaks to the many, and the shift from there to something like here, of course, took centuries. It's a huge effort to bring something like a modern liberal ritual into being. And with this moment of Kircher, we can sort of witness how this transition took place, how this transition happened. So now, today, we are participating in a ritual here where museums and exhibitions have become something like a ritual of aesthetic refinement for the masses. As I said, a ritual that can include a mass of people that nevertheless are not dressed as a mass, but as a collective or a number of individuals. So what is the problem? Why this idea to rethink this format? Because, and I think Tino also already sort of mentioned that, there is weaknesses to this. It can host many people, but statistically, people spend 2 seconds in front of an artwork, or even less. And there are probably statistics about the biennial. I don't know how many seconds people usually statistically spend in a pavilion, but probably not many, which is not a coincidence. It's the flip side of the structure, a structure that was generated to flexibilize ties. I mean, once you're stuck in theater, it's very hard to get out. Of course, you can leave, but it's quite a drama you produce, being stuck somewhere in the middle and having to leave. It's kind of rigid. This is flexible. It allows you to come and go at any point, which corresponds to a modern, equally flexibilized sensitivity that we probably all share here. But the flip side is you don't have to invest time. A structure that is generated to flexibilize these bonds has problems to produce bonds, to actually immerse you into something, to address you, to keep you there, to actually produce something. It's very hard for the structure. It's a structural flip side of this liberal ritual. So, the crucial question that that is inscribed into this Swiss pavilion here also, or in a way into our project of reconfiguring this exhibition ritual, the crucial question today would be how to create a ritual that on the one hand can create these ties, can create modes of addressing, modes of immersing, modes of connectivity, but nevertheless stays a democratic, liberal ritual. So what we do not want is this return to the one that speaks to the many, like we're doing here right now. So this is the task, this is the idea, to invent a new format that can produce these moments of connectivity, but under the conditions, under the premise of a still liberal open structure. And a very important factor in that is time. Of course, once you go to the theater, you make a commitment of time. You stay as long as it takes, as the piece takes. When you go into a museum, you make no commitment that you stay as long as an artwork needs you to stay. So time is important, which is why it became so important in the recent idea to refashion exhibition or cultural institutions. And almost all of the artists that Hans-Ulrich mentioned that somehow participate here, among others like Andrea, hello Andrea, Andrea Sala and others have in recent years worked on this. They have figured out modalities to insert time into their exhibitions, to create something like a time-based exhibition. So what is a time-based exhibition? A time-based exhibition is an exhibition that turns time into the explicit structuring element so that the exhibition de facto changes in time, like the one here, thereby creating its own time into which the visitor is drawn. That's the whole idea, sort of. This new modality creates something like a new exhibition format that I would propose to call an individualized event space. And in fact, the Swiss Pavilion is something like an individualized event space. It figures as an example for this, which again is essentially a hybrid. It's a hybrid between an exhibition and an event space. These are spaces that on the one hand, in their temporal mode and as a dramaturgical composition are in time, are on the one hand close to a theatrical event. Things happen here in time. Yet on the other hand, in their mode of addressal, these spaces stay attuned to a liberal and individualized principle of the exhibition. So they keep this liberal framework of the opening hours. It's not the mode of appointment in there, it's the mode of the opening hours. Visitors are grouped, yes, when you walk to the trolley. They are grouped, but they are not grouped in a fixed collective. It's rather a temporary cluster, so it's a more liberal form of grouping people. It's a relatively loose and liberal form in comparison to theater. So underlying this new format of the liberalized space, or event space, is the search for a contemporary mode of addressing the viewer. A mode of addressal that is more oriented towards the creation of ties than the usual exhibition, and particularly a biennial exhibition, was able to or willing to, and that on the other hand stays attuned to a contemporary, individualized and flexibilized sensitivity. So in a way, if we want to compare Kircher's museum and the Swiss Pavilion, both are hybrids. Both are essentially hybrid places. Huh? But in very different moments of time. Huh? Kircher, in a way, marks the beginning of this shift from the modality of the appointment with hosts, with one that speaks to the many, to a more liberal, open structure, which can emerge because there's a focus on the object. Huh? I mean, you can only have opening hours when you're dealing with objects. So far, at least, at that time. Huh? So the focus on the object allows this new sort of modern format to come into being, and Kircher marks a kind of transitional moment in that. And here again, with the Swiss Pavilion, we again have a transitional moment, huh? Just the other way around. This individualized event space is a moment where we actually go back to a moment that is about a connectivity, that is about addressing, that is about creating a relation from people to people, still mediated through an object, architectural plans, trolleys, models, and so on. So it is the idea to bring back this production of connectivity, this production of a shared experience, but now, and that's the difference, not in a return to the traditional way, but as in combination with a sort of modern, liberalized, flexibilized structure. So thank you very much. That is our first excursion. I hope to see you again in a few hours with a continuation. Stay tuned. Who's next?